Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. In just their third year under PJ Fleck, Minnesota clinched their first 11-win season since 1904. The Golden Gophers finished 11-2, were just one win away from winning the Big Ten West, but ended the season on a high note by upsetting Auburn in the Outback Bowl. It was a very historic 2019 season for Minnesota, but the scary thing is that this 2020 team could be even better. Minnesota returns 8 starters offensively, none bigger than their quarterback in Tanner Morgan, who was one of the most accurate and precise quarterbacks in the entire country last year, throwing for over 3,200 yards, 30 touchdowns, just 7 interceptions, and had a 66% completion rate. The entire offensive line is back to protect Tanner Morgan. He returns 2 of his top 3 wide receivers, and Rashod Bateman, the Big Ten wide receiver of the year, and Chris Ottman-Bell. And then you have Mohamed Ibrahim at running back, who had over 600 rushing yards last year and kind of a dual role with Rodney Smith, who is now departed from the program. This is an offense that averaged 34.1 points per game in 2019 and has the chance to be just about the same, if not better, in 2020. Defensively, that was a side of the ball that really took me by surprise from Minnesota last year. They ranked 10th in the country in total defense in 2019. They allowed just 22.5 points per game, but they only returned 5 starters from last year's unit. They lose 5 of their 6 top tacklers from last year, and they have to replace Antoine Winfield, arguably the best player on that defense last year, who led the team in tackles and led the teams in interceptions as well with 7. So a couple of key pieces to replace defensively, not too many to replace offensively, and this Minnesota team is absolutely a Big Ten title contender in 2020. We take a look at their schedule. It's a very favorable schedule for the most part, with the exception of having to play 10 games before they get their bye week. But compared to last year, this is a very, very good schedule for Minnesota. And we have them opening up the season at 2-0. We think they take care of Willie Taggart and Florida Atlantic, and then we think they take easy care of Tennessee Tech as well. Not too much to get into with those. But right here in Week 3, on a Friday night, they take on Iowa, jumping right into Big Ten Conference play. And this is a big matchup for the Golden Gophers, because if you remember, Iowa was the team that gave Minnesota their first loss last year. The Golden Gophers went into Kinnick Stadium at 9-0, but lost to the Hawkeyes 23-19. So you know revenge is going to be on PJ Fleck's mind. You know that Minnesota is hungry to avenge that loss that they were given on the road last year. This game is at home, which is a huge boost for the Golden Gophers, and they're catching Iowa early. I think it's better to catch the Hawkeyes early here than maybe facing them in late October or November. They're still going to go through some quarterback questions after losing Nathan Stanley. More than likely it will be Spencer Petras going along with a very solid wide receiver core, but they're getting Iowa early. And if Minnesota takes easy care of their first 2 opponents, they'll be very rested for this Hawkeyes team, who have a few tougher tests before that. And I think the Golden Gophers get revenge over the Hawkeyes, and they move to 3-0 on the year. A fantastic start for Minnesota. They then get BYU to round out September. This is not a game that they can afford to overlook either. BYU is one of those teams that you really just don't know what you're going to get out of them. Sometimes they are really competitive, like we saw last year against Tennessee, USC, and Boise State. And sometimes they really disappoint you, like in their losses to Toledo, South Florida, and San Diego State. But the Cougars do return 15 starters, including Matt Bushman at tight end and Zach Wilson at quarterback. And Kalani Sitake has been prone to pull off a handful of upsets every few years or so. This is a game that Minnesota, I think, needs to be cautious of, especially after an emotional win over Iowa. But once again, with home field advantage on their side, I think they take care of the Cougars here. And just like that, They are 4-0. So things are really looking great again for Minnesota. By this point, they are probably a top 10 team in the country. And they are not going to fall out of the top 10 in week 5 because they will take care of Maryland on the road. This is a Terrapins team that Minnesota defeated 52-10 last year. And I know Mike Locksley is going to turn this program around. I think he's doing a great job on the recruiting trail. I think he's doing a great job utilizing the transfer portal. But he's only in year 2 with the Terrapins. They've got to stay healthy at quarterback with Josh Jackson. Their defense has to take a major step forward. I don't think they're going to be that competitive defensively to go up against such a strong offense in Minnesota. Even though they get to host this game, Golden Gophers shouldn't have an issue with it. And just like that, they're 5-0. Then you hit the big game here. On October 10th, they take on Wisconsin on the road in Madison. And if you want to talk about revenge games, here's another one. Because Minnesota's only 2 losses last year were to Iowa and to Wisconsin. And the game last year against the Badgers determined who would win the Big Ten West. And Wisconsin came into a snowy Minneapolis with College game day on the scene and annihilated the Golden Gophers 38-17. So this is going to be an interesting game here. One that I think will be relatively low scoring because you've got a very strong offense in Wisconsin who ranked 4th in total defense last year and returns 9 starters on that side of the ball. What should be a relatively strong defense yet again from Minnesota, and a Wisconsin team led by Jack Cohn at quarterback that torched Minnesota last year for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Badgers are going to have to adjust to life without Jonathan Taylor, and here's going to be a very good test of it. It's going to be a very good opportunity to see where Wisconsin really is without Jonathan Taylor. But Cohn took care of business last year. I think he takes another step forward in year 2, full-time starter with the Badgers. They've got home field advantage on their side, and even though it's a revenge game for Minnesota, I don't like their chances going into Camp Randall Stadium. They take their first loss to the Badgers. They are now 5-1. They then get Michigan on October 17th. So this little 2-game stretch here, very difficult for Minnesota. You're playing Wisconsin out of the West, and they draw Michigan out of the East. Those are 2 very, very good and difficult opponents and 2 teams that have very good defenses. And I think Minnesota is very lucky to be hosting this game against the Wolverines. They just can't afford to be caught on a hangover. And they weren't caught on a hangover last year. After their loss to Iowa, they bounced back with a win before falling to Wisconsin in the season finale. I think the Golden Gophers get a win here. I think they defeat Michigan, a team that, kind of like Wisconsin, is going to rely very heavily on their defense, which should be a top 15 unit yet again, but has to find themselves a quarterback. And, of course, by the 17th of October, they will find a quarterback. They will have found a quarterback, more than likely Dylan McCaffrey. And if Josh Gaddis gets the offense rolling, this could be a much closer game than some would expect. But I like Minnesota having this game at home. I like their offense doing enough to exploit a few weaknesses in the Michigan defense. And I don't think Michigan has enough offensive firepower to exploit enough weaknesses in Minnesota's defense. They get a huge win over the Wolverines and a huge bounce-back win for Minnesota and P.J. Fleck. They then go on the road to face off against Illinois, a team they defeated 40-17 last year. This is going to be a tough game. This is one of those games that you can't afford to overlook. And now Illinois is not a team that you can automatically mark a win down for like you could in years past. They returned 9 starters from a team that finally got to go bowling under Lovie Smith last year. And they're a defense that only allowed 26.7 points per game. So relatively speaking, not too bad. This is an Illinois team also that last year in Champaign upset Wisconsin. Is Minnesota going to be their Wisconsin of 2020? No, they are not. Illinois, the schedule is too brutal for them, and while I do think they take a step forward, certainly competitively across the board, while they could flirt with bowl eligibility, it's going to be a much tougher road this year than it was last year. Minnesota goes on the road and gets a win over the Fighting Illini. They go on the road and get a win over Michigan State as well, a team that, as many of you know, I'm not too high on going into 2020 just because of the unfortunate circumstances they've had to deal with. So much uncertainty there. They had to hire Mel Tucker in February after Mark D'Antonio surprised everybody by stepping down. Then Corona hit. They didn't get spring practice. They don't know who their quarterback's going to be. They have an ongoing quarterback battle, and neither is a great option. Their defense could be a strength, sure, but they only returned 3 starters on that side of the ball. Michigan State, not going to be too competitive across the board this year. Minnesota gets a win over them, and they get a win over Purdue as well. Last year's game was a 38-31 victory for Minnesota on the road, and that was really before Purdue fell apart. They were still battling some injuries then, but that was really before they kind of fully collapsed. I think the Boilermakers could flirt with bowl eligibility in 2020. I think they have a chance to get back with Jack Plummer, David Bell, Rondale Moore, and what should be an improving defense. But Minnesota gets this game at home. They're tired. They got to get a win before they get into their bye week on November 14th. Very, very unfortunate. But looking at this, they are now 8-1. They are now, 9-1. They are 9-1 with just 2 games remaining in the season, which means not only are they Big Ten title contenders, but they are college football playoff contenders as well, if this is how everything shapes out going into their bye week. I think they come out of that week of rest and take down Northwestern. They defeated the Wildcats 38-22 last year in a game that was probably closer than some expected, only 16 points against an abysmal Wildcats team. But their defense is senior-led and returns 9 starters, which was actually a decent defense last year, despite the 3-9 record. The offense was the biggest issue, but they now bring in Peyton Ramsey, the transfer quarterback from Indiana. I think that gives Northwestern a huge boost. I think that makes Northwestern more competitive. I think that might be able to get enough for Northwestern to get back to a bowl game. But off of a bye week, at home, 1 loss, PJ Fleck's not losing to the Wildcats. They get a win, which means it sets up a showdown at Nebraska in the season finale to determine if Minnesota wins the Big Ten West. Because it's a 3-team race in this Western Division. It's going to be Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And right now, Minnesota has a win over Iowa, but a loss against Wisconsin. So this Nebraska game will be very telling on whether or not they can win the West or not, because it's going to depend on how Wisconsin fares the rest of the season. It's going to depend on how Iowa fares the rest of the season. And this game at Nebraska is going to be so big, and this result at Nebraska is going to wildly shake up the Big Ten West standings because we do have the Golden Gophers losing to the Cornhuskers. We do know that Minnesota defeated Nebraska 34-7 last year. But playing in Lincoln is a very difficult thing to do. Playing in Lincoln at night, we presume, is going to be a very difficult place to play. And we do believe that Nebraska will take a step forward in 2020. They've done so every year under Scott Frost. 4-8 to 5-7. This year they will probably break through and get to a bowl game if they can stay healthy. I think Adrian Martinez has a great bounce back year. This could be a game where Nebraska is battling for bowl eligibility. So it means a lot for Minnesota. It means a lot for Nebraska. But I think the Cornhuskers have just enough to pull off the upset, which will send Minnesota to 10-2 in 2020. And that is a great record. That is a great mark in PJ Fleck. But is it enough to get to the Big Ten Championship? Is it enough to win the Big Ten West? They will own the tiebreaker over Iowa if they need it. They will not own the tiebreaker over Wisconsin if they were to need it. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this 3-team race plays out. But nonetheless, Minnesota finishing 10-2. And if that's the case, not only do they have a chance to win 11 games for the 2nd year in a row, but this record right here would be enough to make history, as they would have back-to-back double-digit win seasons for the first time since 1904 and 1905. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out everything we have for you down in the description below. Exclusive college football news, content, and offers that you do not want to miss. So make sure to check it out right now. And once again, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.